Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a fascinating, hidden financial reality that sits right at the intersection of criminal enterprise, high society, and, well, subjective value. We're going to break down how two seemingly completely unrelated worlds actually operate on the exact same hidden mechanics. We're talking a journey from the depths of the jungle all the way to pristine, high-end art galleries.
So, what do illegal candy cartels and a $236 million painting have in common? On the surface, absolutely nothing, right? One involves clandestine labs and illicit goods, while the other is all about champagne receptions and cultural prestige. But stick with me, because as you'll see by the end of our time together, one of these worlds is increasingly being used to solve the very specific problems of the other.
Let's start with candy trafficking, the production, transportation, and distribution of illegal narcotics across borders. To really wrap our heads around this, let's use a little allegory. Imagine a brilliant but highly frustrated character, let's call him Chemistry Monkey. He's working out of a hidden lab in the desert, cooking up a fresh batch of illegal candy. And his product is literally the best on the market, 99.1% pure. Monkeys everywhere are willing to pay an absolute fortune for it. But Chemistry Monkey has a massive problem. He has no way to distribute it. Even with this incredibly pure product, he just can't move it in bulk outside his local neck of the woods. He needs a supply chain. He needs a logistics master.
Okay, let's dive into this supply chain. To move the product, Chemistry Monkey partners with The Colonel. By day, he runs a highly successful fried banana franchise. But underneath those deep fryers, he's a ruthless logistics kingpin. He disguises illicit shipments within legitimate businesses. He even uses a fake NGO called Bananas Without Borders. The goods are packed into plush toys or snack crates. He uses rotating drivers, border mules who swallow the product, even homemade submarines gliding just beneath the water surface. Once it's across the border, local gangs break it down for street distribution. It's basically chemistry meets project management meets transnational logistics.
Now, you might be wondering, why take on all this risk? Well, just look at cartel math versus art math. In the illicit candy trade, a kilo costs about 300 bananas to make, but it sells for over 30,000. The profit margins are massive, sure, but they're rigidly fixed by street economics. Now contrast that with the legitimate art world. A simple sketch that costs maybe €100 in physical materials can eventually be sold at auction for $450 million, just like the famous Salvator Mundi painting. The cartel's margins are huge, but capped. The art world's margins? They are infinitely subjective. And this brings us to the ultimate problem for our criminal kingpin, a mountain of illegal bananas. When you control the supply in the streets, demand literally never ends, and the profits roll in at staggering speeds. But now, you have a mountain of illicit street cash. You can't just walk into a traditional bank and deposit suitcases full of cash without triggering massive anti-money laundering alarms. You have an endless supply of wealth, but it's dirty. You desperately need a mechanism to clean those proceeds, to transform them from illegal street cash into legitimate, usable assets.
To solve this massive headache for the kingpin, we have to pivot to the legitimate art world. There's a great quote from a contemporary artist that perfectly captures this. "I don't paint on commission. I express how I see this person." This is exactly why art is valued so differently from regular commodities. The value doesn't come from the raw physical materials. It stems entirely from the artist's unique interpretation, their reputation, and the emotional resonance of the piece. You aren't just buying canvas, you're buying an expression. And because expression is highly subjective, its financial value is entirely subjective too.
And here's the real kicker. Because value is subjective, it can easily be manipulated. Enter our next allegory, Art Appraiser Monkey. He can look at a skateboard painted with minimal supplies and declare it a $5 million masterpiece. Why? Well, maybe the artist is suddenly trending, or perhaps someone just really needs a massive tax deduction. In the art world, value is totally elastic. If an appraiser and a buyer agree something is worth millions, poof, it suddenly is. This extreme subjectivity is completely unique to high-value art, and as we'll see, it makes the market incredibly attractive to people with lots of cash to hide. But it's not just the artist's name that dictates this extreme value. History plays a massive role. Take, for instance, the mind-blowing $236.4 million recently paid for a Gustav Klimt portrait. What sent this specific painting into the stratosphere was its provenance. It had been stolen by the Nazis, lost for decades, and ultimately recovered and returned to the rightful family. That incredible, dramatic history was literally baked into the price. History skyrockets value, turning a simple piece of art into an ultra-premium asset. Now, at the absolute highest levels of the market, a fascinating shift occurs. It's just a Picasso. A prominent art expert shared this wild anecdote about a wealthy collector negotiating a $1 million purchase of a Picasso over lunch. When asked if he wanted to actually see the painting, the buyer admitted he hadn't even looked at it, just waving it off and saying, "It's just a Picasso." At this tier, the visual beauty of the art totally stops mattering. It ceases to be an emotional purchase and morphs into a pure, high-value, tradable financial asset. It's essentially a bear bond that you can hang on a wall or, hide in a vault. Now, what's really interesting about this is that it isn't just theory. Our fun little allegories crash right into harsh, documented reality when we look at the U.S. Treasury Department. They actually conducted a major study on the facilitation of money laundering and terror finance through the trade in works of art. The government officially recognized that the exact mechanics making art a great alternative investment, its subjectivity, its astronomical value, its opacity, also make it highly vulnerable to bad actors. The Treasury literally set out to study exactly how the art laundromat operates. So, what makes it the perfect laundromat? The Treasury identified a few specific inherent characteristics. First up, high single transaction value. You can move tens of millions of dollars in one single go. Second, easy transportability. Unlike a skyscraper or a yacht, you can just roll up a canvas and toss it on a private jet. Third, a long-standing culture of extreme privacy. Buyers and sellers almost always demand anonymity. And fourth, highly subjective pricing. If a painting's value fluctuates by millions, well, it's super easy to overpay or underpay to quietly transfer illicit funds. And the reality of how these transactions actually occur, it is incredibly opaque. It's almost never a transparent, face-to-face exchange between the creator and the final owner. Instead, the market relies on this massive blurred web of shell companies, trusts, and third-party intermediaries, like art advisors and interior designers. These intermediaries often purchase art on behalf of unnamed clients, and get this, they are under no legal obligation to disclose to the gallery or the auction house who the ultimate buyer actually is. This creates a giant wall of opacity, completely obscuring the true identities and the true source of funds from the sellers. Adding fuel to this fire of opacity are free trade zones, or free ports. These are secure, climate-controlled customs areas often right near airports, where high-value art can be stored anonymously and traded like black boxes. They can sit there indefinitely without ever entering a country's official tax jurisdiction. What makes free ports so incredibly vulnerable is that a piece of art can sit in a crate and its ownership can change hands multiple times through private transactions. The physical asset never even moves. Customs authorities are never alerted, but millions of dollars in value are quietly transferred between totally anonymous parties. This level of theoretical opacity enables some massive real-world crimes. Take the 1MDB scandal. Billions were fraudulently diverted from a Malaysian state-owned wealth fund. A central figure, Joe Low, and his co-conspirators needed to launder this stolen money through the U.S. financial system. So how did they do it? They used a shell company to purchase tens of millions of dollars of high-value art from a New York auction house. They even used completely bogus gift letters, claiming the art was being transferred to co-conspirators in the name of friendship. Just like that, they successfully moved millions in illicit value. And this brilliantly illustrates the ultimate layering phase of money laundering. After Joe Low bought all that luxury art with stolen money, he didn't just hang it in his living room. He used a Cayman Island shell company to put the art up as collateral for a loan, and he received a $107 million loan directly from the auction house's financial services affiliate. Think about that. He took illicit funds, bought art anonymously, and then borrowed against that art to receive $107 million in perfectly clean, legally documented cash deposited straight into his bank account. It is, quite frankly, a masterpiece of financial manipulation. But hey, it's not just international billionaires pulling this off. It happens right here at home with domestic drug traffickers. There was a Pennsylvania marijuana dealer who generated massive amounts of street cash and desperately needed to hide it. So he bought 59 paintings valued at over $600,000 and just stored them on a farm. In a related sting operation, an undercover Homeland Security agent actually walked into a Philadelphia gallery posing as a drug dealer with literal bags of cash. He flat out told the gallerist the money was from illegal activities. And the complicit gallerist? Not only did he accept the cash, he happily offered to keep the buyer's name completely off the official invoices, no questions asked. And now we are entering a whole new digital frontier, non-fungible tokens, or NFTs. These are unique, cryptographically secured digital assets traded on blockchains. You've probably seen the headlines where a single piece of digital art sold for over $69 million. Now, while institutional auction houses are definitely getting involved, the vast majority of NFT trades happen on complex, peer-to-peer digital marketplaces. And unlike traditional galleries, many of these digital platforms simply don't have the same market incentives or reputational concerns to verify exactly who is buying what. It introduces an entirely new, heavily unregulated space where highly subjective value can be traded instantaneously all across the globe.
So what does this all mean? It leaves us with a critical, somewhat unsettling question. As long as there are subjective markets where value is entirely in the eye of the beholder, is any market truly immune to the chemistry monkeys of the world? When value is effectively an illusion, the financial systems built on top of it will always be vulnerable. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I hope this leaves you looking at the art world and the hidden financial systems operating all around us in a totally different light.